Well, good morning and happy Sabbath. Today we're looking at the question, why do we wash each other's feet? It's an interesting question. I know people have asked along the way when it comes on Communion Sabbath, why do we even bother with this? What is the point of washing each other's feet? And so as part of our year-long focus on asking and trying to answer big questions, this is the question we're focusing on today. Why do we wash each other's feet? Different countries have different customs, right? You go around the world and you'll find customs and practices that are just interesting, things that you would never have thought of doing in 100 years, and yet you come across these interesting customs and traditions from other cultures, from other countries. For example, did you know in the United Kingdom, when people are walking along and they see a magpie that's by itself, a lone, solitary magpie, they will take a moment, stop, and salute a lone magpie? I don't know why. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and no one seems to really know why they do that, but that's part of the tradition there. Did you know that if you're single at 25 years old in Denmark, you better be prepared for your friends to throw cinnamon on you? That's another unusual custom. I don't know why. As I was looking at various odd customs from around the world, you'd be surprised at how many actually revolve around people in their mid-20s being single. And just, I don't know why, but that's a thing, and especially European countries. But in Denmark, if you're single at 25, you're going to get quite a heavy dusting of cinnamon. In Mexico, when you celebrate a birthday, it's the tradition to someone come along and smash your face into the cake. Doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are, once you blow out those candles, you need to be prepared. Maybe, hopefully, you've been doing some neck exercises. You have a nice, strong neck to try to fight back the force that's coming down, because it's going to happen. You get your face smashed into your cake on your birthday. We have these unusual customs. Cultures have unusual customs. Families have their own unusual customs. Religions have their own unusual customs. Christianity has plenty of its own customs in its own right. Some are fairly common. Some don't seem to be too out of the ordinary. But there are a few, such as foot washing, that are different. That if you've never had any exposure to Christianity before and you just come and to church on one random weekend and this starts happening, you're like, what is going on? What is this all about? Foot washing is one of those things that Christians do that causes a lot of people to stop and wonder and question. Even other Christians, you might think, why are we doing this? I mean, it's 2017. What is the point of any of this? Yeah, maybe it could see, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, the necessity of that. But we walk around in shoes and socks on paved sidewalk and paved streets. We're not walking in sandals and in dirt and mud and manure. So what's the whole point of this foot washing thing, especially being practiced in 2017? And in fact, a lot of Christians have asked that and wondered. And in fact, a lot of Christians, in fact, the majority of Christians, have stopped doing this tradition, regularly at least. The majority of Christians, if they actually think about washing each other's feet, it only happens once a year, on Maundy Thursday, which is the Thursday of the Holy Week, of that week leading up to Easter. That's really the only time that the vast majority of Christians think about washing each other's feet, because it just seems so out of place in today's modern world. But there's still a few groups that have held on to this tradition. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church is one of those groups. In fact, it might be one of the only groups left that still practice this tradition of foot washing more than once a year. We do it once a quarter, 4 times a year, when we gather together to celebrate communion, to eat the Lord's Supper. We practice this other tradition of washing each other's feet. And so why do we do that? Why, out of the rest of Christianity, why do we still continue in this tradition? I think to answer this question, we need to look at the story, look at the Bible passage that deals with the reason behind it, that deals with the example that was set, that deals with this tradition, where it began, this origin of this tradition of washing each other's feet. The story is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 13. John chapter 13 begins with an interesting passage. Here John is setting the stage for foot washing, for this story between Jesus and his disciples. And he begins in John chapter 13, verse 1, writing, "It was almost time for the Passover feast. Jesus knew that it was time for him to leave this world and go back to the Father. He had always loved those who were his own in the world, and he loved them all the way to the end." And this, I believe, gives us some insight to answer this question of why do we wash each other's feet? Because as we try to answer this question, we'll find that it's actually not just a simple answer, that it's a complex answer, that there's multifaceted parts to this answer. In fact, there's 5 components, 5 reasons why we continue to wash each other's feet. And this verse provides the insight to the first reason. And that is, we wash each other's feet because this practice is rooted in love. Here, Jesus begins this foot washing ceremony, actually, with this meditation on love. The fact that he knew his time was short, but he loved his people so much. He loved his followers so much. He loved the world so much. This set the foundation. This was the framework that began this unusual custom that has carried on to this day. The fact that it was rooted in love. Because if you think about it, that really is the only reason why you would want to wash another person's feet, isn't it? I mean, maybe if you were getting paid a good amount of money, that might be the only other reason. But really, when it comes down to it, the only reason why you would even think about washing someone else's feet is because you care for him. You care for her. Even here, 2,000 years later, we find that the basis for doing something so unusual is love. That's the reason why you serve someone, even if it's not just washing their feet. That's the reason why you sacrifice for someone, why you put yourself in awkward situations for another person, why you might do something that you wouldn't necessarily want to do. It's because you love the other. This is the first reason why we wash each other's feet, is because it is rooted in love. We continue in this passage in John chapter 13, verses 2 and 3. Jesus and his followers were at the evening meal. The devil had already persuaded Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to turn against Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him power over everything, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. Jesus was there with his disciples in this upper room, ready to celebrate this important festival, Jewish festival, the Passover meal. And he knew his time was coming to an end. And he knew that this was the last shot he had with all of his 12 disciples gathered. This was the last chance that he had to impart the main emphasis, the main focus, the main reason for his mission to this earth. And he knew that this time was running short, and so he had to do something, because here, as the other Gospels explain, as when they come to this story of the Passover meal, the disciples still hadn't understood, really, the purpose of Jesus' mission. After 3.5 years of trying to tell them and to tell other people that his kingdom was not of this world, that he had not come to set up an earthly kingdom and to save them from the Romans, that he had come to establish a spiritual kingdom, to save them from sin and from death. The disciples still, after all of this time, still hadn't quite got the picture, because the other Gospels record that the conversation that the disciples were engaging with at this point was a question over who was going to be the greatest. Who was going to be the greatest in Jesus' kingdom? Who was going to sit at his right hand? Who was going to sit at his left hand? Out of the other 12, which of them was going to be Jesus' number one man? Missed the whole point. And so Jesus knew that his time was running out, and he had this last chance with all of the other 12 disciples gathered in this room. And so he knew he had to do something different. He knew he had to do something major, something that would grab their attention, something that would linger with them, something that they would remember even after he was gone. And so he does something completely unexpected. Perhaps you've been in a similar situation. Maybe you've tried to explain something to your children, or maybe to your parents, maybe to a family member or a friend, and they just didn't seem to be getting it. You've been trying to explain it to them over and over again, but still it wasn't sinking in, and so you had to think outside the box, and so you did something different that was surprising, that was shocking, to get their attention, to get them to see the point that you were trying to make. And this is what Jesus does. In verse 4, it says, "So during the meal, Jesus stood up and took off his outer clothing. Taking a towel, he wrapped it around his waist. Then he poured water into a bowl and began to wash the followers' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him." Here was Jesus trying to impart this one final lesson, trying to get this purpose ingrained into his disciples' minds, that he was there to serve. And this, I believe, is the second reason why we continue to wash each other's feet, because it shows humility. It shows humility. Ellen White, one of the founders of our church, writes in the beautiful book, profound book, Desire of Ages, page 650. She writes, "There is in man a disposition to esteem himself more highly than his brother, to work for self, to seek the highest place, and often this results in evil surmisings and bitterness of spirit." He said, within us, Ellen White writes, that within you, within me, there is this desire to elevate ourselves, to see ourselves as supreme, to see ourselves as better than other people. And she said, and because of that natural inclination, that tendency that we all have, it can cause a lot of problems. It can cause a lot of bad things to be the result of that mindset. She continues, "The ordinance of foot washing is to clear away these misunderstandings, to bring man out of his selfishness, down from his stilts of self-exaltation, to the humility of heart that will lead him to serve his brother." We wash each other's feet because it reminds us that we need humility. We all have that inclination to put that crown on our heads, right? Maybe you've worked with a boss that just decides, I'm the leader, and so you need to serve me because I'm the leader, right? Jesus says, no, this is the opposite. The people that might have the most inclination to have the biggest head are the ones that need to serve the most. And that's the case when we wash each other's feet. It is almost impossible to be filled with yourself, to have a big head, to have a big ego when you're kneeling in front of someone else and washing his feet or her feet. That act of service, it keeps us humble, reminds us that we're not the end-all, the be-all and end-all, right? It reminds us that we are not really more important than anyone else. It reminds us that as puffed up as we might feel in the rest of our lives, that when we gather here at church, that we have no reason to be puffed up, that we have no basis to have a big head, that we have no foundation to be cocky, because when it comes down to it, we are here to serve others, because that is what Christ did for us. Passage continues in John 13, skipping forward to verse 12. When Jesus had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and sat down again. He asked, "Do you understand what I have just done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that is what I am. And this is our third reason why we wash each other's feet, is because it stresses equality. Jesus says, you know that I'm your teacher. You know that I'm your Lord. You know that I'm the leader. And yet, I have served you. Do you see what I've done? He asked them, trying to get them to really comprehend and to really see what's going on. He said, I am your leader, I am your teacher, I am your master, I am your Lord, and yet I have taken the place of a servant, the lowliest of servants, and come around and washed each of your feet. It stresses equality. Eckhart Mueller, an Adventist theologian, writes, although Christianity does not do away with all social distinctions, before God, all differences of rank, status, race, gender, and age no longer count. In this sense, foot washing is in many ways a critique of social injustice. It says because equality is at the heart of what it means when you kneel down to wash someone else's feet, it gets to the heart of any feelings of injustice, especially social injustice. I mean, can you imagine a member of the KKK washing the feet of an African-American person? It would be impossible, right? With that mindset. Because when you're down and you're washing the feet of another person, it shows that you are equal. It doesn't matter what your education level is. It doesn't matter how many zeros are in your bank account. At that moment, there is no one above the other. It shows that we are equal. And this is what Jesus says. I am your leader. I am the one that of anyone that deserves to be served. And yet I am the one that has done the serving. And in fact, I have served Judas, the traitor, as well as Peter, the rock. Because here, everyone is equal. Verse 14 continues. Jesus says, if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash each other's feet. I did this as an example so that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, a servant is not greater than his master. A messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. And this is the fourth reason. We wash each other's feet because it is commanded by Jesus. As Christians, we're called to follow him. We follow him in the way we act, in the way we think, and in the way we try to develop our character. But here, this is not just an implied thing that Jesus wants us to do to follow him. He says directly, explicitly, I have done this as your teacher, as your leader, because you need to do as I have done. I have done this to show you an example of how you're supposed to act in this specific case. I have washed these others' feet because I expect you to wash their feet. And so we follow Jesus' example here, and we wash each other's feet because that is what he has commanded us to do. And John wraps up this passage on foot washing in chapter 13, finishing with verse 17. He quotes Jesus as saying, if you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And this is the fifth and final reason why we wash each other's feet, is because it brings a blessing. Bending down, humbling yourself, reminding yourself that you are equal with everyone else in this church family. Doing this to follow God because it is his command. And knowing that at the root of it is love. There is a blessing that is inherent to washing another person's feet. And I know you might think, well, that's strange. How can doing something so awkward, something maybe so gross, maybe something so uncomfortable, how can that bring a blessing to me? Ed Christian writes, he's a Seventh-day Adventist professor. He says, because it is unusual, because it's embarrassing, it breaks something open in us, lowers our inhibitions, opens doors to the soul so that God's Spirit can flow in. See, it is, I believe, because Jesus knows how our minds work. He knows that when we go through something that gets us out of our comfort zone, when we do something that challenges us, when we do something that we don't necessarily want to do, when we do something that we wouldn't have really chosen to do otherwise, it has an effect on us that makes us open in ways that we wouldn't have been open before. I mean, if you think of any other circumstance in life that you've experienced some awkwardness or something embarrassing, maybe you remember as a child doing something embarrassing, and what did you want to do? You wanted to run home, and spend time in your mother's arms, right? Being comforted. Maybe even as you grow older. Maybe you might be in your 50s, 60s, 80s, and there's times when you're like, I just want my mom to hold me again, right? You have these feelings, these urges to find comfort from your mother because of things that happen in life. Here God is saying, look, I know that you might be doing this that makes you uncomfortable, it's something that's awkward, but it's going to open you up to doing something that you might not have been open to before, to receiving my Spirit in ways that you might not have been open to before, to being open and to be receptive and to be blessed in ways that you might not have been otherwise. Washing each other's feet, it brings a blessing because it opens our hearts more than they would have been open before. And so when we return and we participate in the Lord's Supper, when we eat the bread and we drink the new wine, because of the preparation that has happened internally in that moment of awkwardness or uncomfortability, washing another person's feet, serving another person, it makes us more open to be served by God, to remember His ultimate service for you and me on the cross of Calvary. So this morning, as we question, why do we wash each other's feet? It's a fivefold answer. We do it because it is rooted in love, because it shows humility, because it stresses equality, because Jesus commanded it, and because it brings a blessing. So this morning, do you want to receive that blessing? This morning, are you willing to do something that you might not do otherwise? To do something that might seem out of place in 2017? Are you willing to do it? Because this is an important tradition that we believe in as Christians. Because God has commanded it. Because really it brings a blessing and it is rooted in love.